Welcome to Literal BS, where we break down the lies, expose the propaganda, and talk about what's going on in America, and no sugarcoating. Today, we're tackling a question that frustrates a lot of people who follow the facts. Why do so many poor and uneducated Americans vote Republican? Not just once, but over and over, even when the policies hurt their wallets, their families, and their communities. It may seem irrational at first glance, but upon examining the history, media influence, and cultural manipulation, it begins to make uncomfortable sense. If you're looking for clarity, you're in the right place. Let's cut through the bullshit and get to it. Let's start with a truth that both parties know but rarely say out loud. The working class is easier to control when it's divided. That's been a foundational strategy of Republican politics since the late 20th century. While the Democratic Party once had a firm grip on the working class, especially after the New Deal era, Republicans slowly chipped away at that support through a mix of racial coding, cultural warfare, and fear tactics that made economic issues take a back seat to emotion-driven identity politics. Now here's the catch. Republican economic policies are not built for poor Americans. They center around tax breaks for the rich, deregulation of corporations, slashing public services, privatizing education, and limiting labor rights. These are policies designed to help the wealthy accumulate more wealth. And yet, a massive base of the GOP's voters is the very people being crushed by these policies, folks living paycheck to paycheck, relying on government programs, stuck in areas devastated by factory closures and rising healthcare costs, and because they've been sold a narrative, not a policy. To understand that narrative, we have to go back to the 1960s and the birth of what's known as the Southern Strategy. After the Civil Rights Movement, the Republican Party saw an opportunity to pull Southern white voters, many of them working class, away from the Democrats by appealing to their cultural and racial resentments. Nixon and Reagan didn't come out and say it plainly. Instead, they used dog whistle terms like states' rights, law and order, and welfare reform, and it worked. Suddenly, poor white voters began voting not based on class solidarity, but on cultural identity. They were convinced that Democrats wanted to give their tax dollars to undeserving black people, immigrants, and the so-called lazy urban poor. Reagan doubled down in the 1980s. He introduced the myth of the welfare queen, a black woman supposedly driving a Cadillac while gaming the system. It was a lie, but it stuck. This image reinforced racialized stereotypes that turned white working-class resentment toward the poor, not upward at the rich robbing the system, but downward at those even poorer than they were. It was divide and conquer on a national scale. By the time Fox News came onto the scene in the mid-90s, conservative media had become the nerve center of this manipulation. Today, the average conservative voter consumes a steady diet of propaganda that tells them they are the victims of a liberal elite, that the government is too big, that immigrants are stealing their jobs, and that liberals want to erase their values. None of these narratives has anything to do with real-world economics, but they're effective because they tap into emotion, not logic. Fox, QAnon, Newsmax, and right-wing talk radio repeat the same message. Liberals hate you. They look down on you. They want to take your guns, force you into cities, and corrupt your children. And here's the especially dangerous part. They frame the wealthy Republican donor class as the good guys. Billionaires like Elon Musk or the Koch brothers are painted as job creators, freedom lovers, and symbols of American success, even as they bankroll the very policies that keep wages low, crush unions, and decimate public education. It's all smoke and mirrors, and it works. Education plays a huge role in this. The more access you have to quality education, the more likely you are to vote based on policy rather than tribal identity. But in many red states, education has been intentionally underfunded for decades. Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, and West Virginia, the states that rank lowest in education, also tend to vote solid red. And that's no accident. A less educated population is easier to manipulate, especially when complex policy issues are boiled down into a culture war between real Americans and coastal elites. It's not about facts, it's about team loyalty. And once someone picks a side, confirmation bias kicks in. Facts that challenge the narrative are dismissed. Only the stories that reinforce the belief are accepted. Let's talk religion, because this is another key piece. Many poor and working-class voters identify as deeply Christian, especially in the South and Midwest. The Republican Party has spent decades embedding itself as the party of God, anti-abortion, pro-prayer, anti-LGBTQ, and defenders of traditional family values. They've turned Christianity into a political weapon, and in doing so, captured a voter base that believes voting Republican is a moral obligation, regardless of how destructive the policies may be. And here's the hypocrisy. These same politicians will get health care, cut school lunches, and oppose minimum wage increases, all while calling themselves pro-life. People vote their identity, not their reality. If you identify as Christian, rural, patriotic, and self-reliant, Republican messaging speaks directly to you, even if your community is falling apart from job loss, opioid addiction, and lack of opportunity. The illusion of representation replaces the reality of exploitation. Another piece of this puzzle is the myth of the American dream. Republican rhetoric constantly reinforces the idea that anyone can become rich if they work hard enough. So poor voters often don't see themselves as working class. They see themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. They vote for tax cuts for the rich because they plan to be rich someday. It's aspirational, and again, it's emotional. It's rooted in hope, even if the system is rigged to keep them exactly where they are. But here's the brutal truth. Upward mobility in the US is lower than in most developed countries. If you're born poor in America, you're more likely to stay poor than someone born in Canada, Germany, or even the UK. And the very policies that could change that, universal healthcare, tuition-free college, and affordable housing, are blocked by the same politicians these voters support. We also can't ignore the rural versus urban divide. Republicans have framed big cities as dangerous, immoral, crime-infested liberal wastelands. That's why you constantly hear them say things like, "Look at Chicago. Look at San Francisco." They turn urban issues, homelessness, gun violence, and drug addiction into talking points that scare suburban and rural voters into thinking Democrats are destroying the country. But what they don't say is that many red states have higher poverty, worse healthcare outcomes, more uninsured people, and lower life expectancy. That part gets left out of the narrative because it ruins the illusion. At the end of the day, voting Republican for a poor American is often not about economics at all. It's about identity, culture, fear, religion, and misinformation. It's a political ecosystem designed to keep people misinformed, divided, and emotionally reactive. And as long as that continues, millions will keep voting against their interests, while billionaires laugh all the way to the bank. If you're angry right now, good. That means you're paying attention. The truth is, we can't fix what we don't understand. This system thrives when we stay confused, distracted, and divided. But the facts are clear. If you're working class in America and voting for politicians who slash your wages, destroy your healthcare, and hand tax cuts to the ultra-rich, you're not voting for your freedom. You're voting for your exploitation. It's time to stop falling for the narrative. Wake up, look up, and speak up. The only way out of this mess is through truth. And that's exactly what we aim to bring here, every single episode. Thanks for tuning in to Literal BS. This is Rob, and if this episode hit home, do us a favor. Subscribe, drop a comment, and share it with someone who still thinks trickle-down economics is a strategy and not a scam. We'll be back next week with more real talk that the mainstream won't touch. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and stay bold.